Good afternoon, listeners. This is Imad Kasir, your RJ on Planet FM 87.6. The show is your favorite, Mind and Muse. And dear listeners, you can catch us live on www.radio.gov.pk/live-streaming. You can also follow our Facebook page with the name Planet FM 87.6. And you can also download the Radio Pakistan's official app from the Play Store, and you can listen to us on that app as well. And dear listeners, as you all know that 8th of March is celebrated as the International Women's Day across the globe, and we give tribute to our women from all walks of life, and we have this today's episode. It's a special tribute to the women writers, and especially from the subcontinent. And for that matter, we have invited a very special guest, and he'll be joining us on the telephone from Lahore. He is a very well-known, award-winning Pakistani writer, Mr. Raza Naeem. He is a researcher, he's a dramatic reader and a translator, educated in political economy from the University of Leeds and Middle Eastern history. And he has received the 2013-14 Charles Wallace Trust Fellowship for his work on Manto, and his and he was a finalist for the 2017 Jawad Memorial Prize for Urdu English translations. His writing has been widely read and featured at major international festivals. He is the president of the Progressive Writers Association, and he recently received the 12th Anjum Romani Pride of Performance Award. He is currently working on the books of Hasrat Mohani, Khatir Ghaznavi and Ishrat Afreen, and he is such a wonderful person to talk to, and we had invited him earlier also on the World Translation Day. And today again he is our guest, and we are genuinely grateful to him for taking time out from his busy schedule to join us in our show. Welcome to the show, Raza Naeem.
Thank you, Imad. Good to be here. Your voice is a bit up and down, please. I think there's some distortion.
Okay, let me just
Very clearly.
fine. We'll try to get this thing fixed in a while. And Raza, would you please tell us a little, tell our listeners, in fact, something about your own journey, and tell us more, as I have tried to cover all the areas in which you have worked, but let our listeners know more about you, please.
I don't think I've understood the part of your question very clearly. I think what you were trying to say in the first part was I should tell you something about my literary journey.
Sure, of course, your literary journey, of course.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, this is a day to celebrate in women, not me, but since you have been very kind to ask this opening question, I'll try to be as brief and concise as possible. I've been trained in the social sciences from, I did my BSc Honours in Economics and Finance from this private university here in Lahore, the Lahore School of Economics, and then immediately afterwards, just actually 3 days after 9/11 happened in September 2001, I proceeded to the University of Leeds in UK to do my master's in development studies. Now this is a subject which is actually about it's a social science, not limited to just one discipline. It's just understand that it's a subject which is basically about the problems of third world countries like Pakistan. So if I had really followed the logical route, I might have been employed somewhere in the International Monetary Fund or in the World Bank, but many of us do not take the path which everyone takes, or I might have continued in the State Bank, but that was also not interesting or fulfilling enough for me. So I've mostly taught in my career at different universities, and but this literary journey, it almost began like an accident, I would say. I was into the habit of writing articles during my BSc for newspapers on different issues, current affairs, but it never struck me, not in a very planned sort of way, if I may say so. I didn't plan to become a writer. Like you, for example, there's no literary pedigree in my family at all. There's no writer in my family for, I don't know. So I guess maybe it's the effect of my reading, because I used to read world classics, and I still do. And then I think at the age of just when I was finishing my BSc, I decided that I had read enough world classics. Now it's time to read and reread our own literature. And when I say our own literature, I don't just mean Urdu literature, which is my mother tongue, but also all the literature in our subcontinental languages, like Urdu, Hindi, Sindhi, Pashto, and translations mostly. And that is actually basically when I also decided, after going through our literature of the subcontinent, that I really wanted to become a writer, and in which field, basically in the genre of essay writing. And also I'm going to be translating our own classics from English to the only language which I know, which I can confidently translate into, which is Urdu. So this was like I think was like 25 years ago, but I have my translation journey is only about 12 or 13 years old. I began to translate Sajjad Manto in his 100th birthday year, which was celebrated all over the world, where Urdu is spoken and understood, in 2012. I began by translating Manto's non-fiction, because not much attention has been focused on Manto's non-fiction as opposed to his fiction. And then, as I began to read and reread, and opportunities arose, and remember, I'm totally self-taught in the art of translation. Yes, I have learned from people, but I haven't been directly mentored by anybody, because translation studies was relatively a new field here. In the subcontinent. Yes, there had been many world-class translators from Urdu in India and Pakistan, but it was not considered a lucrative enough profession or a respectable enough profession in literature. Because in literature, well, either one is a poet or one is a fiction writer. But I chose a different field, which actually I thought appealed to my own aesthetic sensibilities and interests. So yeah, वो जिसको हम कहते हैं कि वो जो नशा था जो तर्जुमे का, I hope we can make it bilingual, because of course English is our official language, but Urdu is also one of the official languages spoken, and also because I myself am a translator, I hope we can switch between उर्दू और इंग्लिश. तो वो नशा ऐसा चढ़ गया तर्जुमे का कि बस फिर उसके बाद पीछे नहीं देखा, और आगे देखते गए, और अभी भी तराजुम कर भी रहे हैं और पढ़ भी रहे हैं.
That is really great to know. And dear listeners, as in the intro I mentioned that Raza Naeem is a translator, and he is currently working on many poets and authors, and Ishrat Afreen Apa I mentioned. And dear listeners, Today on this International Women Day, we invited Raza because Raza has been working. Raza has a special focus on the works of the marginalized and especially the works of women, and he has translated Kishwar Nahid's poems also, and he has he'll be sharing his experience on translations also. And Raza, please enlighten our listeners about the historical context of women writing in the subcontinent and pioneers like Razia Sajjad Zahir Sahiba and Ismat Chughtai Sahiba. The way they showed the way for later female writers like Jilani Bano, and we'll be discussing Jilani Bano in detail, dear listeners, as we all know that she was a wonderful writer who recently passed away. And so Raza, please enlighten us that what is that historical context of women writing in the subcontinent, and share your thoughts on them. Raza, can you hear me, please? I think, listeners, Raza has lost the connection, and we have lost, in fact, the telephone connection. Let us try to, get him back on the telephone line. And Raza, are you there? Can you listen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you very clearly.
Okay, so Raza, I was asking you to enlighten our listeners about the historical context of women writings in the subcontinent and pioneers like Razia Sajjad Zahir Sahiba or Ismat Chughtai Sahiba, the way they showed the way for later female writers like Jilani Bano, who we'll be discussing in detail today because she has recently passed away, and you are working on her works also. So tell our listeners about your take on these pioneers.
Yes, it's a very interesting question. Thank you for asking that. Well, women's writing was not a very established tradition in the Indian subcontinent. Whether we are talking about Urdu or any of the other languages, remember this is like a colonial period, yes, there were all women often on writing. Most of them wrote under the pen names of their sons or their husbands, because again, so much was the patriarchy and orthodoxy, especially in Muslim households. I think I'm going to be talking about Urdu. And again, I would also like to smash this impression that Urdu is a Muslim language. You can't describe religions as languages. I mean, languages has been there before religions ever came. So it was not that Urdu was only spoken in Muslim households, but because being a Muslim in colonial India shaped you in a particular way. So talking about Muslim women writing, most of the women, and even Jilani Bano and Ismat Chughtai and these even their sailing towards getting educated was not smooth. So even you had pioneers like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, they were not very keen on women's education. I have read that once when a proposal was brought to Sir Syed Ahmad Khan about women's education, about the possibility of maybe setting up a women's school, he actually tore it up. So it was a very sensitive issue. Even enlightened people like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, who we regard as a great mentor and one of the founders of Pakistan. So at that time, early 19th century, still, we were not ready for for Muslim women writing, but that changed very quickly with the foundation of the Progressive Writers Association. And this is a very momentous year because in April 2026 we will be marking the 90th anniversary of the PWA, the Anjuman Tariq Musannifin, which I would like to remind your readers, your audience, that it was the second most powerful social movement in India in the second half of the 20th century after Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's Aligarh movement, and it had all of the major writers in all of the languages of India as its members and representatives. And of course, the pioneers of this movement were all Muslim, enlightened Muslims, and now they have become legends. People like Sajjad Zahir, who, as you know, was the husband of the lesser known Razia Sajjad Zahir, who later on became one of the pioneers of women's writing. There were people like Professor Ahmad Ali, who later on migrated to Pakistan. There were people like Sahibzada Mahmud Zafar, and of course, there was one woman in this group of pioneers who was Rashid Jahan. And Rashid Jahan and Sahibzada Mahmud Zafar later married and became a couple. And it is lesser known that it was Rashid Jahan, I mean, who was also a pioneer of the Angaray. Angaray was this incendiary, very rebellious kind of a collection published in 19, 32. These are a collection of stories by all of these four pioneers, whose basic purpose was to reform Muslim society from the obscurity and patriarchy in which it had fallen, and also at the same time to work for the independence of India. And because Rashid Jahan was the only woman in this male-dominated collective, she was the one who was singled out, and the Maulvis got very upset, and the British actually, resorting to the pressure of the fundamentalists, they actually had to ban this collection. And Rashid Jahan was also even threatened with an acid attack. So Rashid Jahan's father, Maulvi Mumtaz Ali, was a very enlightened person. He was so enlightened that they were in favor of women's education, even while being comrades of Sayyid Ahmad Khan. And when they couldn't find a female teacher to educate their daughter Rashid Jahan, they actually, Maulvi Mumtaz Ali and his wife Muhammadi Begum, they actually educated Rashid Jahan themselves. So Rashid Jahan was a big pioneer. I mean, as I mentioned, there were women writing before Rashid Jahan, but not in this open sort of a way with their own name. And of course, Rashid Jahan also was a member of the Communist Party of India. And she was a gynecologist, and her work exposed her to all strata of Indian society. So in her stories, unfortunately, she is little celebrated now, but what the facts are, you cannot deny. मतलब उनकी कहानियों में आपको उन तमाम मुस्लिम लेयर्स की कहानियां मिलती हैं, क्योंकि उनका ताल्लुक था, उनका वो डॉक्टर थी और ख़वातीन के अमराज की, और उनके मसाइल से डायरेक्ट उनका जो था वो तशखीस करती थी. तो फॉर एग्जांपल दिल्ली की सैर उनका एक बड़ा मशहूर अफसाना है, जिसमें बहुत मतलब तलखीस, वो एक 2.5 सफ़े का अफसाना है, लेकिन वो बुरका पोश औरत की कहानी है कि उसने बुरके में होते हुए वो एक उसका हस्बैंड उसको कहीं छोड़ के चला जाता है रक्शे के लिए वेट करने के लिए, और वो जो सैर, जिसको सैर कहा गया है, वो एक सटायर है कि वो वहां पे बैठे बैठे उसने बुरके के पीछे से वो पूरे शहर की सैर कर ली. तो कमाल का वो अफसाना है. और फिर मतलब रशीद जहान के बाद जाहिर बात है उनकी तो बहुत जल्दी वफात हो गई, लेकिन उसके बाद कहने लगे कि फ्लड गेट्स खुल गए, और फिर रजिया सज्जाद जहीर जो हैं, जिनको हम कम जानते हैं, उनके हस्बैंड जो थे सज्जाद जहीर, वो ज़्यादा वेल नोन हैं. उन्होंने मतलब ये वो ज़माना है जब मतलब ख़वातीन ने अब नुमाया होना शुरू किया था. एंड देन रजिया सज्जाद जहीर ऑल्सो हेल्ड हर ओन एंड कंट्रीब्यूटेड स्टोरीज. और फिर आपको पता है उनके हस्बैंड पाकिस्तान चले गए और वहाँ पे उनको सजाए मौत हो गई. वो यहाँ लाहौर फोर्ट में, इसी शहर में जहाँ पे मैं इस वक्त हूँ, he was on death row, not knowing whether he would survive or not. And his wife Razia Sajjad Zahir was back in Delhi. She was taking care of 4 daughters, and she was writing full time, she was teaching. तो वो एक बड़ा खतरनाक ज़माना था. और आज जब हम रज़िया सज्जाद ज़हीर को देखते हैं तो वो एक बड़ी एडमरेबल खातून और एक राइटिंग की पायनियर हमें लगती हैं, बिकॉज इस सबको एक साथ समेटना और साथ लेके चलना, when you know your husband is on death row in a neighboring country, not knowing whether he's going to come back. And then even when Sajjad Zahir was released, he came back to India. बहुत कम साथ उनका गुजरा. He passed away in Alma-Ata when he was attending a writers conference, and leaving Razia Sajjad Zahir with the task of writing and taking care of her daughters. One of their daughters now is a very well-known writer in her own right. You know her, Noor Zahir, who is now in London, and she has been again carrying forward the legacy of the family. और फिर रज़िया सज्जाद ज़हीर के बाद इस्मत चुग़ताई, जिनके बगैर जारी बात है रशीद जहान जिस तरह हैं, उसी तरह रज़िया सज्जाद ज़हीर हैं. इसमत चुग़ताई again, coming from a very very conservative household, जहाँ पे औरतों को बस स्कूल के बाद उठा लिया जाता था ये कह के कि अब शादी. और फिर इसमें चुग़ताई has told in her legendary sketch दोज़खी, आपको पता है ये बहुत अब तो उर्दू अदब में मशहूर हो गया. दोज़खी कौन है? उनके अपने भाई, जिस दोज़खी की बात हो रही है. क्योंकि दोज़ख में वो क्यों गए अकॉर्डिंग टू इसमत चुग़ताई? क्योंकि उन्होंने अपनी छोटी बहन की वकालत की. उन्होंने कहा कि इसमत चुग़ताई insisted that I want to complete my BA, I want to teach, I want to work. So the only supporter in her family was her elder brother Mirza Azim bin Chughtai, who we all know now as the Dozakhi of Ismat Chughtai sketch. और उन्होंने चैंपियन किया क्योंकि वो उर्दू अदब में औरतों के सबसे पहले चैंपियन थे. आपको पता है उन्होंने एक नोवेला वैम्पायर नाम का लिखा था, जिसमें पहली दफा उर्दू अदब में जो फीमेल, जिसको हम सेक्सुअल मतलब रेप कहते हैं, उसका मसला पहली दफा उस नॉवल में, मतलब ये जो वैम्पायर है, इट्स नॉट अ स्टोरी अबाउट ड्रैकुला. ये वैम्पायर जो है एक अलामत है उस मर्द की जो कि कम उम्र में जिस बीवी से शादी करके बेसिकली वो जबरदस्ती कर रहा होता है उसके साथ, वो शादी का बंधन नहीं निभा रहा था. तो उनके बड़े भाई ने, इसमें चुग़ताई's older brother, he supported his sister. And then we all know कि इसमें चुग़ताई क्या बन गई जब उन्होंने वो पहला अफसाना अपना लिखा लिहाफ. और फिर कितना there was a lot of uproar and they said a woman can't write this. And then everyone thought that her elder brother, who was much more established at that time, he had written. But then the elder brother said, no, I haven't written this अफसाना. लिहाफ, और अगेन लिहाफ की भी अपनी तारीख है क्योंकि आपको पता है उर्दू में नॉट डायरेक्टली होमोसेक्सुअलिटी की थीम पे मतलब ज़ेरे लब इशारा जो था उसमें डायरेक्टली नहीं किया हुआ था. लेकिन फिर आपको पता है इसमत चुग़ताई को लाहौर आना पड़ा जहाँ उन पे केस हुआ. और जाहिर बात है वो केस जो था वो उन पे कुछ प्रूव नहीं हो सका क्योंकि जिसको हरसत मुहानी ने कहा ना लतीफ़ हवसनाकी, उसके साथ इसमत ने डायरेक्टली उन्होंने होमोसेक्सुअलिटी का जिक्र उसमें नहीं किया. और वो बिल्कुल आखिरी सतर में वो हमें पता चलता है अफसाने की कि एक्चुअली हो क्या रहा था. वो बेगम और वो जो कल्लो की जो दास्तान है उनकी मेड की. तो ये सब लोग ये पायोनियर्स थे. और जारी बात है जिलानी बानो हो या पाकिस्तान और हिंदुस्तान में बाद के लिखने वाले हो, एक पूरी नस्ल है. इनके बगैर हम इनके बारे में उसी तरह बात करते हैं जिस तरह हम 20वीं सदी में जिलानी बानो साहिबा की नस्ल की बात करते हैं कि ये जो थे रास्ता दिखाने वाले भी थे और रास्ता जलाने वाले भी थे.
Absolutely, Raza, you have in detail enlightened our listeners about the historical context of women writing in the subcontinent, and it really, we all know that in those times for a female writing was not that easy as we see
Yes.
it today. And you in detail told our listeners about, you shared your take on the writings of Rashid Jahan Sahiba or Razia Sajjad Zahir Sahiba. We all know her. And then you shed light on Ismat Chughtai Sahiba's writings, and this is absolutely, we all know and we admire them for that in those difficult times they were the pioneers who showed the way for the later female writers like Jilani Bano. And can you, Raza, enlighten our listeners also about that in that era, in that you are discussing in this part of the subcontinent in which we live in Pakistan, what was the situation of women writers in Pakistan then?
What period are we talking about?
The period of in which in the period when Ismat Chughtai Sahiba and this Razia Sajjad Zahir Sahiba, they were writing. And can you please name a few?
Yes, as I mentioned, the first half of the Progressive Writers Association had already been formed in April 1936. So after after let's say a decade, almost more than a decade, the partition happened, and many of these writers were on the way of becoming established, many of these women writers. So Pakistan was made in 1947 और अंजुमन तरकीब मुसन्निफीन हिंदुस्तान में भी जारी रही. और जो है वो मतलब पाकिस्तान में भी जारी बात है. पाकिस्तान में भी मर्द और औरत दोनों ख़वातीन लिख रहे थे. लेकिन आपको पता है पाकिस्तान में हालात वैसे नहीं रहे जैसे हिंदुस्तान में रहे, बिकॉज पाकिस्तान और अभी तक हम इसका खामियाजा भुगत रहे हैं। थोड़ी बात पॉलिटिकल हो जाएगी, लेकिन थिंक इसके representative democracy in Pakistan. I mean, the first constitution was not in 1903. It was 8 years between 1947 and 1956. I mean, yes, women were writing. I'm not understanding
So,
who we are talking about.
let's
They, for their own reasons, they opted to stay in India. I mean, Sajjad Zahir Sahab, obviously, he was a member of the Communist Party of India, and he had been asked by the leadership to go to Pakistan and help with the founding of the Communist Party of Pakistan. But very soon after that, he was forced to go underground because the agencies were after him. In fact, the arrest warrants for Sajjad Zahir Sahab had come from the CID in Pakistan even before he had set foot on Pakistani soil. So in Pakistan, unfortunately, the conditions at that time, what to talk about women, even for men who were writing progressive fiction, they and poetry, they were not very, इतने साजगार नहीं थे। और इसका पता आपको उस जमाने के कुछ मेमोइर्स अगर आप पढ़ें, I mean, of course, this is a country which was made in the name of Islam, तो बुर्का पर्दा तो पहले यहाँ पे इम्पोज कर दिया गया था। आप ईश्वर नाइन साहिबा, अल्लाह उनको लंबी उम्र दे, उनका मेमोइर पढ़ें, बुरी औरत की कथा, उसमें आपको पता चलता है वो डेकेड्स कितनी स्टाइफलिंग थी। लेकिन मंटो जैसे लोग लिख रहे थे, मतलब मंटो के कलम से इस तरह की चीजें निकल रही थी। चर्चा साहब नाम खुद और क्रिटिकल वॉइसेस थी, लेकिन आई मीन खवातीन बाद में आके फिर जो दूसरी जनरेशन है, मतलब इन लोगों की बाद की जनरेशन है, इसमें रज़िया सज्जाद ज़हीर और Rashid Jahan, then we basically talk about the contemporaries of Jilani Bano in Pakistan। और वो कौन लोग हैं? बड़े कमाल के लोग हैं, उनमें नेसेसरली प्रोग्रेसिव लोग नहीं है। देखो पाकिस्तान
I think we have lost connection with Raza, and we'll be joining him. Listeners, meanwhile, let's play this lovely track, and we'll join you right after this track. Welcome back, listeners. This is Imad Kasir on Planet FM 87.6. The show is Mind and Muse. And today we are having a very special guest, Mr. Raza Naeem, with us, and we are discussing the women writers' contribution with respect to the International Women's Day being celebrated on the 8th of March. Raza, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I am here. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. So, Raza, we were discussing the historic context of the women writing. Raza, as I shared in the start, that Jilani Bano Sahiba, who recently passed away, and she has an interesting, an interesting fact that she was born in the year 1936, and that is the year when the progressive writers movement was also formed, and in Lucknow, as you mentioned also. So tell our listeners about Jilani Bano Sahiba, as we all know, but I would like you to tell our listeners about her, how brilliant writer she was.
Can you repeat your question, please?
Raza, I was asking you that please enlighten our listeners about Jilani Bano Sahiba, who recently passed away. Tell our listeners about her, that how wonderful writer she was, and what is her role in the literature.
It's a big question. I hope that you will break it up as we proceed. How to introduce someone who herself has become part of history now? Well, the easiest way to answer this question is that I was just telling you before the break that the Progressive Writers Movement was born in April 1936. So in July 1936, July 14 to be honest, Jilani Bano Sahiba was born. So I mean, we can say that अंजुमन तरक्की व मुसन्निफीन और जो है जिलानी बानो साहिबा की पैदाइश एक ही साल में हुई, कुछ महीने अपार्ट. तो आप समझ सकते हैं कि फिर कितनी तारीखी अहमियत की वो हामिल है. और जो जुलाई 14, 1936 को उनकी she was born in the history of Badaयूं. And Badaयूं is a very, very
yes, it's a historic city. Yes, scholars and saints, and it's a very, very historic angles to this city. So please go ahead. Raza, can you hear me? Are you there? So dear listeners, when we have a guest on the telephone, this is what it happens in routine. So Raza, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, that's great. There was some problem with the connection, and so Raza is back, and Raza was enlightening us about Jilani Bano Sahiba. So Raza, please continue. You were sharing your thoughts that in the year 1936, the Progressive Writers Association was formed, and that was the same year when Jilani Bano Sahiba was born on 14th of July, to be specific, in Badaयूं. So please continue.
So she was born in the historic Indian city of Badaयूं. The city of Badaयूं is famous for its poets, its saints, and its literary figures. हमने तो ये भी सुना कि बदायूं के पेड़े बड़े मशहूर हैं, लेकिन
yes, we all know in Pakistan also.
देखें किस किस्म के लोग, कैसे कैसे लोग उसमें पैदा हुए. अब्दुल कादिर बदायूनी और शकील बदायूनी और हैरत बदायूनी, जो कि जिलानी बानो के वालिद साहब थे, उनका भी थोड़ी देर में नाम दोबारा आएगा. फानी बदायूनी,
yes, they all were wonderful people, absolutely.
और फिर सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट बात ये है कि जिलानी बानो से पहले जो एक पीढ़ी थी राइटर्स की, इस्मत चुगताई और अदा जाफरी, वो भी बदायूं में ही पैदा हुए थे. तो I remember when I was moderating a panel on अदा जाफरी's autobiography, जो कि एक क्लासिक है, और उसमें उस ज़माने के बदायूं का बड़ा अच्छा नक्शा मिलता है. मतलब इनमें से किसी राइटर ने भी सिवाय इस्मत चुगताई के कोई मेमोir उस तरीके से वो हमें बदायूं के बारे में, तो क्या हालात थे और वहाँ पे मुसलमान सोसाइटी के क्या हालात थे, तो वो पूरी, तो मैंने वो रिसर्च फेस्टिवल में इसकी मॉडरेशन मैंने की थी, इस पैनल की, जो इनकी जो है ना, उनकी जो खुद नविश्त है अदा जाफरी की, जिन्हों पे गुजरी, उसका इंग्लिश ट्रांसलेशन उनके बेटे डॉक्टर आमिर जाफरी ने किया है. तो साथ में यास्मीन साहिबा और ज़रा ने गावी बैठी हुई थी. तो मैंने पूछा ज़रा आपा से कि बदायूं के पानी में या उनके जो मट्टी है उसमें क्या कोई ज़रख़ेज़ी ख़ास है कि यहाँ पे इतने बड़े बड़े लोग पैदा हुए. और हमारे मौजू में जो ख़वातीन के अदब का है कि इसमत चुग़ताई और अदा जाफरी और फिर जिलानी बानो, तो ज़ाहिर बात है इसका कोई कुल्लिया तो नहीं है कि किसी शहर में उसकी ज़रख़ेज़ी, या लेकिन यह कि ये बात सनद है. तो वहाँ पे जिलानी बानो साहिबा पैदा हुई, लेकिन उनके वालिद जो थे वो बसिलसिला मुलाज़मत जो है वो, आपको आवाज़ आ रही है?
जी रज़ा, we can hear your voice. जी रज़ा, yes, we can hear you. Please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
So his Jilani Bano's father, Allama Hayrat Badaयूनी, he basically moved to Hyderabad, Deccan for employment, और वहाँ पे फिर जो है वो इनकी विलादत, वहाँ पे विलादत क्या कह रहा हूँ, वो विलादत तो इनकी बदायूं में थी, लेकिन वहीं पे फिर हैदराबाद में इनकी परवरिश हुई जिलानी बानो की, और फिर वो बाद में इसी शहर को अपना घर कहने लगी. और एंड her upbringing was very conservative, and you will be surprised to hear that she cleared all of her exams privately. Tried till her MA Urdu. All of the exams which she gave till MA Urdu were given privately, although there was a scholarly atmosphere at home. but the conditions of those days did not allow, the social conservatism did not allow for women like Ada Jafri or even women like Jilani Bano to be sent to school or university for education. And basically Jilani Bano's literary career started from this environment, and her first short story, which became a classic, Mom Ki Maryam, that was published in Adwi Latif, which is a very important Urdu journal and still being run. It was published in the annual issue of Adwi Latif, and from that story, Jilani Bano basically she established her credentials. और मतलब फिर जारी बात है
Raza, would you enlighten our listeners which year it was when this Mom Ki Maryam that got published in the Adbi Latif journal you are mentioning?
I think Mom Ki Maryam basically came out when she was in her 20s.
All right.
1950s में ये मंजर आम पर आया था. I cannot.
Okay, fine, but it was in her early 20s and the decade was the 50s decade. Yes, that's perfectly fine.
Yes, so as you know, at that time it was the era of the progressive writers movement. अंजुमन तरक्की मुसन्निफीन का डंका था. वैसे तो अलकार मावेज़ की 1939 में वजूद में आ चुकी थी. मीरा जी, नून राशिद जैसे लोग भी लिख रहे थे, लेकिन मीरा जी की तो वफात हो चुकी थी 1949 में. लेकिन अंजुमन तरक्की मुसन्निफीन का डंका था और कोई हैरत की बात नहीं थी कि इवन कंजर्वेटिव माहौल में भी जिलानी बानो जैसे लोग वो तरक्की पसंद तहरीक की हवाएं उनको छू जाए. और फिर जारी बात है इसी तहरीक को उन्होंने अपना ओढ़ना बिछोना बनाया. और मतलब मेरा ख्याल है आगे फिर जब आप सवाल पूछेंगे तो मज़ीद उनकी तहरारी में जाएंगे. लेकिन मतलब 12 कलेक्शंस इन्होंने अफसानों की पब्लिश की और 2 बहुत ही बेहतरीन किस्म के नॉवल जो है वो अब इनकी मीरास के तौर पे जो है वो
yes
50 साल से ज्यादा का इन्होंने लिखा है इन्होंने.
Yes, for almost absolutely, and for almost half a century she was actively writing, and her contribution is really great and can never be ignored in Urdu literature. And dear listeners, we will be discussing in detail about Jilani Bano Sahiba with our special guest Raza Naeem. He is with us on the telephone from Lahore, and we'll be taking you to the newsroom for the news bulletin, and right after that we'll be joining you, so stay tuned. Welcome back, listeners. This is Imad Kasir, your RJ from the show Mind and Muse on Planet FM 87.6. And we are today discussing the contribution of women writers, in particular from the subcontinent, with respect to the International Women's Day, which is celebrated on the 8th of March every year. And for that discussion, we are having a very special guest, Mr. Raza Naeem, who has joined us from Lahore on a telephone, and he is enlightening us on the on that historic that historic context of that female writers of that era. And then we discussed the Progressive Writers Association, which was formed in the year 1936, and we have a special focus on Jilani Bano Sahiba, who recently passed away, and she was born in the year 1936. And before this news bulletin, dear listeners, we were discussing her contribution. And so, Raza, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
So that's great. So, Raza, tell our listeners that you were telling that you were sharing your thoughts that when Jilani Bano, she moved to Hyderabad and eventually made it her home for the rest of her life. And what were the circumstances that led to this move?
I think I explained when I was telling you earlier on in response to your question. Although she was born in Badaयूं, but basically her father, Allama Hairat Bidayuni, he had to move to Islamabad.
Hyderabad.
Not Islamabad, to Hyderabad for reasons of employment, and that was the reason then why Jilani Bano and actually her whole household had to move to Hyderabad, and that's also since then she has constantly lived there, and she died there in the Banjara Hills area, and she called Hyderabad her home subsequently. And in answer to your earlier question, you were asking me when her first short story was published, Mom Ki Maryam. So the record I have, her first collection of stories, Roshni Ke Minar, it was published in 1958 by Nyay Dara. So yes, this is basically the time around which her first short story was published, 1958.
All right. So
Mom Ki Maryam in Adbil Latif, the annual of Adbil Latif.
The annual issue of that Adbil Latif. So that's great. And right, and that was Mom Ki Maryam. So what was?
That's right.
Right, and then what was theme of that story?
Actually, Mom Ki Maryam is actually एक phrase है ये उर्दू में, आपने शायद पहले सुना हो.
Yes.
Basically, Mom Ki Maryam का मतलब ये होता है कि कोई बहुत ही डेलिकेट किस्म की मतलब खातून हो, बहुत ही डेलिकेट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की खातून हो, और इसका जो इक्विवेलेंट है हिंदी उर्दू में वो मिट्टी का माधु, आपने शायद ये टर्म भी सुनी हो, मिट्टी का माधु, ये ज्यादा मशहूर टर्म है. तो मोम की मरियम बेसिकली जो है वो एक ऐसे खातून की कहानी है जो मतलब देखें हम उनके मौज़ूआत नॉर्मली जो है ये देखें, बल्कि मैं उन्हें कोट भी करना चाहूंगा. ये जो पहला इनका मजमुआ था उसमें इन्होंने रोशनी के मीनार, इसमें इनके दिवाचे में देखें जिलानी बानो क्या लिखती हैं अपने किरदारों के बारे में, एंड आई कोट, मैंने भी ये कहानियां नहीं लिखी, 3 लकीरें खींची हैं ताकि दुनिया की सब सीताएं अमन और हिफाजत के हिसार में महफूज रहें और सारी दुनिया के रावणों की लाखों में मिर्चें भर के उन्हें उल्टा लटका दिया जाए, एंड कोट. तो ये बेसिकली जो है ये इनका आदर्श है, और इसी के आदर्श जो है उन्होंने अपनी जो है वो सारी अदबी जिंदगी जो है वो मतलब वक्फ कर ली. तो मतलब मोम की मरियम में बेसिकली जो है मतलब इनकी कहानियों में मतलब इन्होंने मुतनव्वो चीजों पे लिखा है, और मोम की मरियम में मतलब इनकी हर दूसरी कहानी में बेसिकली जो हैदराबाद की जो एक मिट्टी भी ज़वाल याफ्ता तहजीब थी, मतलब कुछ लोगों ने उसको ज्यादा जो है वो
Hyderabad itself. Yes, and you are referring to that Hyderabad of that time that also produced powerful literary voices, and that entire
yes.
So and it really was a fascinating place in the 20th century, ruled by the princely state under the Mir Osman Ali Khan, and all that social and yes, and that political and social environment that must have that strong influence on her literary life, and that is what you are referring to. Raza ji, please.
जी हैदराबाद जारी बात है, and in that time Hyderabad was I think the richest princely state in India, and in the politics of post partition and partition subcontinent, basically Pakistan had its own interest. हमें मुताला पाकिस्तान में ही पढ़ाया जाता है कि जी वो एक मुसलमान हुक्मरान था निज़ाम, और 80% से ज्यादा रियाया उनकी हिंदू थी, लेकिन और इंडिया में जारी बात है वो इस बेसिस पे उन्हें नज़म करना चाहते थे कि उनकी रियाया जो थी वो अक्सरियत हिंदू थी, लेकिन मामला तबकाती मामला ज्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट था. جس کی طرف جیلانی بانو نے بعد میں اپنے ناول بارش سنگ میں بھی یہ مسئلہ اٹھایا کہ معاملہ اس میں طبقاتی تھا, کیونکہ بیسیکلی the peasants of Hyderabad, they were fed up with the excesses of that feudal order, that feudal system which had oppressed them for centuries, and they wanted an end to this system of feudalism. I mean, whether the state accrued to India or Pakistan was a totally secondary matter. تو ایک کسانوں کی ایک تحریک وہاں پہ زبردست قسم کی چلی, اور بہت سے کمیونز بنائے گئے. مطلب نظام کے جو تعلق دار تھے, جاگیردار تھے, بیسیکلی لارج اسکیل ایکڑ کی زمینیں ان سے چھین کے کسانوں نے وہاں پہ اپنا راج قائم کیا. اور بیسیکلی ون آف دا میجر پوئٹس آف دیٹ ایرا, مخدوم محی الدین, وہ بیسیکلی اس موومنٹ میں, کیونکہ وہ کمیونسٹ پارٹی آف انڈیا نے یہ موومنٹ لیڈ کی تھی, تلنگانہ کی تحریک اس کو کہتے ہیں, جو وہاں کے کسانوں نے, تلنگانہ جو ہے اب تو ایک ریاست بن گیا, بٹ at that time it was a part of Hyderabad state. The princesses, so there was a very powerful movement in Telangana in the 1950s. It went on for 4 or 5 years, and it basically created an alarm in the states of India and Pakistan. But because India was a direct neighbor, they basically wanted to make sure that the Nizam's order was not disturbed, that the آپ کو پتہ زمانے میں کمیونزم پوری دنیا میں تھا, تو وہ یہ نہیں چاہ رہے تھے کہ مطلب وہ ویدر نظام کا سسٹم کنٹینیو رہتا یا وہ تو ایک الگ بات ہے, لیکن وہ یہ چاہتے تھے کہ اس موومنٹ کو برباد کیا جائے, تباہ کیا جائے. سو بیسیکلی مخدوم محی الدین ون آف دا میجر لیڈرز آف دس موومنٹ, اینڈ آف کورس آپ کو پتا ہے کہ ہمارے ہاں تو ان کا ذکر کم کیا جاتا ہے, لیکن وہ کمال کے شاعر تھے. اور مطلب میرا خیال ہے کہ مطلب یہ بات اتنی پاپولر نہیں ہے, لیکن آئی ول سے دیٹ میرا خیال ہے اگر وہ زندہ رہتے تو وہ شاعر اگر فیض سے بڑے نہیں تو فیض کے پائے کے شاعر ہوتے. اور اگر آپ ان کی شاعری دیکھیں, مطلب ہمیں تو انہوں نے اتنی زبردست غزلیں, آپ کی یاد آتی رہی رات بھر آپ نے سنی ہوگی, یہ ان کی غزل ہے مخدوم محی الدین کی. اور بہت سے لوگوں کو یہ بات نہیں پتا کہ یہ غزل یہ مخدوم محی الدین کا, ہمارے پاکستانی سنگر نے احمد جہاں نے بڑی خوبصورت طریقے سے اس کو گایا ہے. تو لیکن یہ بالکل اس زمانے کے شعراء میں یہ کامن بات تھی. مطلب وہ انقلاب کی بات بھی کر رہے تھے, وہ رومان کی بھی بات کر رہے تھے, اور مطلب مجاز کے ہاں آپ کو یہ چیز مل جائے گی, فیض کے ہاں تو ظاہری بات ہے, لیکن مخدوم فاض سے بہت پہلے ان کے ہاں آپ کو. تو مخدوم محی الدین جو ہے وہ اس موومنٹ کو اسپیئر ہیڈ کر رہے تھے, اور پھر اوبیسلی اس موومنٹ کا ادب پہ بھی بہت گہرا اثر پڑا. یہ موومنٹ ویسے تو it was defeated because the Indian state intervened, and it basically forced the Nizam to sign the paper of accession to India, and basically they moved, but their main purpose was to destroy the communes which had been set up in the liberated areas by the peasants of Telangana. So obviously this movement created a big rupture in the communist movement. The communist movement in India divided because of this movement, because there was a discussion in the Communist Party about whether the correct tactics had been followed by the peasant movement. تو پھر 2 پارٹیاں بن گئی, کمیونسٹ پارٹی آف انڈیا اور کمیونسٹ پارٹی آف انڈیا مارکسسٹ, اور ابھی تک یہ ڈویژن باقی ہے. لیکن اردو ادب پہ جو اس کا اثر پڑا وہ ظاہری بات ہے, مخدوم تو اس میں تھے ہی تھے, لیکن مطلب جیلانی بانو جن کی ہم ابھی بات کر رہے ہیں, her basically she was obviously in her 20s when this movement erupted, and she basically مطلب ان کے ہر دوسرے افسانے اور ناول میں کہیں نہ کہیں اس حیدرآباد کا ذکر ہے, جو ایک ایسا ایک جاگیرداری نظام جو تب برباد ہو رہا تھا, جو زوال آبادہ تھا. مطلب راجدہ تبسم نے بھی وہ بات کی ہے, لیکن ان کا موضوع وہ ذرا سیکس کا تھا, وہ ذرا اس طرف چلی گئی, اور وہ بھی اس پہ بھی بات ہونی چاہیے. انہوں نے ذرا برانگیختہ لہجے میں بات کی ہے اگر آپ ان کا مجموعہ چٹنی پڑھیں, لیکن ان کا کمال ہی ہے جیلانی بانو کا, جہاں پہ راہیں مطلب واجدہ تبسم اور جیلانی بانو کی راہیں الگ ہوتی ہے. کہ واجدہ تبسم نے ذرا ایک بے باک طریقے سے اسی تہذیب کا ایک نقشہ کھینچا, لیکن جیلانی بانو کے ہاں آپ کو ذرا دھیمے لہجے میں کرٹیسزم ملتا ہے, دھیمے لہجے میں غصہ وہاں بھی موجود ہے, ملال وہاں بھی موجود ہے, لیکن کوئی نوسٹالجیا نہیں ہے. مطلب اس مٹی ہوئی تہذیب کے لیے نہ کوئی نوسٹالجیا ہے, نہ کوئی دفاع کرنے کی کوشش ہے جیلانی بانو کے انسانوں میں.
Yes, Jilani Bano, she has her own style of expressing this, and Wajida Tabassum, she had an entirely different and bolder style of expressing her emotions with respect to that that civilization that you are referring to of that time in Hyderabad. So, Raza,
Yes.
when you go through, when you read the works of Jilani Bano Sahiba, what themes stand out the most to you?
Well, of course, it's not fashionable to say, that being a woman writer, although I am not in favor of pigeonholing writers on the basis of gender, as Oscar
Yes,
Wilde
it's
said, there is no
defined.
no such thing as a good or a bad book, no such thing as a good book or a bad book. Either literature is written well or it is badly written. So similarly, same for the writer. Writer is not defined by gender, but वो एक default mode में setting है कि जब हम किसी खातून तो feminism का हवाला तो जरूर आएगा. मतलब in the stories of Jilani Bano there are different themes. One, for example, on one hand we have parents who are basically Jilani Bano is actually startled and she's irritated by this attitude among parents still carrying forward why they give preference to their boys over their sons over their daughters. Then many parents basically who come from lower middle class families, they basically they hold off marrying their daughters because every other groom is demanding dowry. So basically if they can give their daughters away without a demand from dowry, that is good. And then how women's emotions are played with by men and men of their own household. So all these things are there, and here I am remembering this quote from a wonderful short story by Jilani Bano. Iska unwan hai Sati Savitri, and this is part of her collection Nirvan.
Okay.
Which came out, in 1963, early in her career. अब देखिए जुमला कितना जबरदस्त है. I quote, अब्बा समझते थे कि लड़कों को पढ़ाना तो रुपए को ब्याज पर चलाना है, बाद में माँ सूद के वसूल कर लो. End quote.
Yes,
इसी तरह एक और उनका another short story called प्यासी चिड़िया, same story collection निर्वाण. I quote, मैं तो अब खतरे की सुर्ख झंडी, इंसानी पिंजर की भयानक तनबी, मुझे एक मांस पर बांध कर लोगों को दिखाओ. End quote. So basically, most of her stories deal with the middle class, the family life, and especially what the females, as daughter, as as daughter-in-law, as sister, as mother, they are basically going through. But there's a strong reference of class as well, especially those families which have been driven apart by partition of the subcontinent. So when she discusses the partition, Munqasim Khandan, how partition of India divided families, then there is a strong reflection in these characters of the class. For example, I would like to quote this lovely line from this short story called Ek Anar, which is part of a very first short story collection, Roshni Ke Minar, which we have talked about. देखिए क्या कहते हैं in the context of partition. भगवान गारत करे इस राज को जिसने हमारे बच्चों का चैन आराम छीना, बुढ़ापे में हमारी शान घटाई, आज ये दिन आन लगे कि हमारे बच्चे तेरे मेरे आसरे लेते फिरे. End quote. Then another short story called Dreamland. This very brief line, but look at how meaningful it is. I quote, पाकिस्तान क्या बना कि अपने साथ सारी रिवायतों असूलों को बया कर ले गया. End quote. पाकिस्तान क्या बना कि अपने साथ सारी रिवायतों असूलों को बया कर ले गया. End quote. Another attitude which we have, we think here in educated society that psychological problems are only created when the sexual desires of people are suppressed. I don't think that is true. Psychological problems are not just a problem of suppression of sexual desires, because things like poverty, unemployment, and deprivation also create psychological problems among people. So this is also where Jilani Bano is excelling. How people become a victim of psychological problems, you know, नेवरात्रि तस्वुर जिसको हम कहते हैं. और उन्होंने, you know, in many of her stories she has कमाल के dialogues, मतलब उसमें है कि how people who are suffering from psychological weaknesses, how basically, and she doesn't distinguish between Pakistan and India. You know, if you just feel like reading about Indian society, you just feel, oh, she could have been talking about someone in Pakistan. You know, and here I'm going to again, you know, recite a quote from another of her short stories called Mitti Ki Guriya. I mean, the गुड़िया का जो इस्तियारा है वो बहुत दफा आया है.
Yes, and this is
you know,
used by most of the female writers. Yes, please go ahead.
ये कोट देखिए आप, इनका एक अफसाना है भंवर और चिराग. ये फ्रॉम हर वेरी फर्स्ट कलेक्शन रोशनी के मीनार. आई कोट, आप रक्स का मुजाहरा करने के लिए चंदा जमा कर रही हैं, लेकिन मैं अपने बीमार बाप की दवा के लिए किस नाम से फंड करूं, कौन सी अपील तैयार करूं. एंड कोट. And another, you know, a quote from the same short story मिट्टी की गुड़िया. I quote, घर की भूख को मिटाने के लिए बेटी की फरोख्त के बाद पेट की खंदक बहुत बड़ी है भाई, सिर्फ एक औरत की लाश से नहीं भर सकती. पेट की खंदक बहुत बड़ी है भाई, सिर्फ एक औरत की लाश से नहीं भर सकती. End quote. And this dialogue basically after the daughter in the house has been sold in order to cater to the hunger which is prevalent in the home. So the way she deals with psychological weaknesses in people is amazing. But again, feminism is only one reference in her stories. You know, she deals with other issues as well, current affairs and also music. You know, she had a great command over classical music, and that has also been rendered beautifully in some of her short stories.
This is really interesting to know, and that apart from feminism and all those social themes, she discusses music in her stories also. So do you have any line, as you quoted a few regarding that her command on the music and which she has used in her stories? Can you share any line?
Yes. You know, in one of her interviews, Jilani Bano claimed that one of her stories called Yaqeen ke aage guman ke piche, that was written after she had heard Raag Kedara. You know, it's a Raag.
Yes.
She had heard Raag Kedara for more than 1 hour. She had been talking to a classical music pandit, and that was how that afsana was written. And one of her other titles is, one of her other short stories is called Kedara. And in this story, she has displayed her full knowledge of her awareness of music. But it's so interesting how she relates this affiliation with music with the political and social consciousness of the time. Let me recite you a few quotes, you know, from this other short story of hers called Zille Subhani. End quote. How she has related her awareness of music to an awareness of the social and political consciousness. I quote, चांद सूरज सितारे ये सब स्टेज ड्रामों और कल्चरल प्रोग्रामों ही में तो काम आते हैं, तो हमें जिले सुभानी का हुक्म है कि आज जब तक वो तैयार ना हो जाए सूरज ना निकले. End quote. Then she carries on in the same short story. I quote, क्या हमारे मुल्क में अनाज का कहत है जो ये परिंदे सरहद की तरफ जा रहे हैं, इससे हमारे मुल्क की बदनामी होगी. वजीर आजम कल से सरहद की तरफ उड़ने वाले तमाम परिंदों को हलाक कर दिया जाए. End quote. And then relating to music, this line from the same अफसाना जिले सुभानी, I quote, बूढ़ा मौसीकार अब राग की सरशारी में वहां तक पहुंच गया था जहां ख्वाह में हर तरफ नूर ही नूर था, रंग ही रंग बिखर रहे थे. And then end quote, another quote, and this may seem like it has been written in Pakistan. Just look at this line. I quote, अचानक सारे मुल्क में अंधेरा छा गया क्योंकि दूसरी फायर की जद में सूरज की बजाय भेरवी के वो सुर आ गए थे जो रोजाना आकाश और पाताल से सूरज को खोज निकालते थे. End quote. And there are not many examples of short stories like this, which seem that they have been written. I mean, of course, she was an Indian writer, but there is only just one other short story I know. Surinder Prakash, a very well-known Indian writer, उनका एक अफसाना बजूका है. That is the only other example I have of a short story in the last few years, which has been written by an Indian writer, but feels like it was written for the times of Ziaul Haq in Pakistan. You know.
Well, all the writings, as you just as you shared a few quotes from her short stories and her novels and stories, and the way her awareness of this the music you mentioned, rags and all that stuff. So this is really amazing to know that that coming from a background,
Yes.
you mentioned that it was very conservative times also, in the time when she was
Very much.
growing up, and in that time for a female, and knowing that much about music also. So it is really amazing to know that how genius she was, and not only in her with the pen, but with also this awareness of music. Raza, how would you compare the writing of Jilani Bano Sahiba with that of her contemporaries like Quratullah and Haider Sahiba? You also mentioned Ismat Chughtai Sahiba. We know that both these wonderful classic writers, Quratullah and Haider Sahiba and Ismat Chughtai Sahiba, they had their own styles and they had their own works. But how do you compare the writings of Jilani Bano with these two giants?
Well, I think Shakespeare said comparisons are odious. I normally don't think that comparisons yield any worthwhile analysis. However, if you know, there were many people in those days who were trying to copy Ismat Chughtai and Quratullah and Haider, जिसको हम telltale कहते हैं ना, on a
Yes.
telltale level. You know, many of the story writers of that time, they tried, and they were very bad copies of Ismat Chughtai and Quratullah Haider. They couldn't succeed. However, Jilani Bano, it is correct to say that she has written about both these two big writers. She has written about Ismat Chughtai, she has written about Quratullah and Haider, and the way she has written, it shows that even there is a correspondence. You know, एक जिलानी बानो की एक अलग से उनकी जो खतूत की किताब थी, वो भी बाद में पब्लिश हुई, जिनमें उनमें खतूत भी जो है वो आपस में एंगेज हुए हैं, और उससे पता ये चलता है कि you know, she liked the work of both Ismat Chughtai and Quratullah and Haider, but in the matter of art, Jilani Bano is unique. She has her own style, and neither does she have the style of Ismat Chughtai. हम कहते हैं Ismat Chughtai ने बेगुमाती ज़बान, आपको पता है, she is known for using बेगुमाती ज़बान, but with the Jilani Bano, you don't have the sort of एक शौक सी ज़बान जो इसमें चुगताई इस्तेमाल करती है, वो हमें we don't find that with Jilani Bano. And similarly, Quratullah and Haider's novels are known for having a deep historical consciousness. Even that we do not find in Jilani Bano's work. Jilani Bano is a product of her own environment. The environment of Hyderabad, Deccan, which she herself had distilled in, she was a part of, and when she enters that environment, there is no comparison with any of her writers of that period. She is totally on her own. She is at an unmatched level, and this is the reason because there was she continued reinventing herself. Many of her peers had given up on her, saying, "Oh, she's a progressive writer," and we only. When she started writing in the 1950s, everyone said, well, she's a progressive writer, so we can only expect progressive themes from her. But in 1979, she shocked everybody when she published her new collection called Paraya Ghar, because she told her critics that she's a progressive writer. Yes, she's writing about, the lower classes of society, about women. But, she reinvented herself, and she was published in Shabkhun, of Shamsur Rahman Farooqi Sahab, who is regarded as an anti-progressive writer. So there you have it, so she constantly reinvented herself, and that is the reason why, for the longevity of her work, and why she has an incomparable status among Urdu writers of the 20th century. And I think this is the reason why we are talking about her.
Yes, now, and this is a wonderful way of putting this. And dear listeners, Raza very rightly mentioned that we cannot compare, like for instance, we cannot compare Shakespeare with Milton, or we cannot compare Mir with Ghalib. And they all have their own styles, their own flavors, but such questions are asked just for the knowledge of the readers or the listeners, if we are in a show, so that they can know what difference and what the uniqueness of their style was. As Raza rightly mentions that Jilani Bano, she had her unique style of writing, and he also mentioned that she was published in Shabkhun also, and that was a very famous journal of Shamsur Rahman Farooqi Sahab. So Raza, Jilani Bano Saiba also wrote a few novels in addition to her short stories. So could you enlighten our listeners a bit about those works also?
Say that again. I think the earlier part of your question was cut off.
Raza, Jilani Bano Saiba also wrote a few novels in addition to her short stories. So could you enlighten our listeners a bit about her novels also?
Well, she wrote two novels. One of them called Awane Ghazal, that was written in 1976. Years ago this year. So that novel is celebrating its 50th publication anniversary. Unfortunately, I have been trying to find it. I don't know if it has been published in Pakistan. That novel, it talks about how just familiar concerns of short stories.
All right.
How women, basically even educated women, are exploited by the men of their household. And even, yes, those women are educated, but only that amount of freedom is given to those women which can be exploited by the men of the household for their own selfish needs, and the novel basically, Awane Ghazal, has two main characters. Both are girls, educated girls, called Chand and Ghazal. Now both of these are liberated women, but unfortunately they can do nothing to stop their sexual exploitation. Ghazal is basically exploited by her maternal uncle, her mamu, and Ghazal is basically sexually exploited by her own father, Humayun. And both of these men, who were basically guardians and protectors of their daughters and nieces, they basically used both these women for a few rupees, and they made these educated women into society girls. This is just one quote from the novel, where one of the heroines, Chand, she is addressing the other heroine, Ghazal, in the following words, and I quote, मैं तो सिर्फ 26 वर्ष में मौत के किनारे खड़ी हूँ, लेकिन गजल तू भी तो खुद चलना छोड़ दे. अपनी तकदीर बनाने का हौसला हर औरत में नहीं होता, इसलिए अपनी बागें बीबी के हाथ में थमा दे, वरना राशिद मामू और खालू पाशा तुझसे अपनी कामयाबियों के कुफल खोलेंगे और तुझे फेंक देंगे. End quote. Unfortunately, the women characters in the novel, yes, there is at least one character of Kasir, a woman who refuses to be exploited, and she stands up for her own rights. But the novel is also about, mostly about the sexual exploitation and of women, how women's bodies are not their own. They belong to the master being the men of their family. And this is why this slogan, Mera Jism Meri Marzi, it is not a hollow slogan at all. There is no controversy, because women writers like, Jilani Bano were talking about Mera Jism Meri Marzi, without naming it as early as the 1970s, 50 years ago. So I don't understand what the controversy about Mera Jism Meri Marzi is. I think, it's a very common sense slogan, and basically in this novel also, women are basically trying to say that we are the masters of our own body. We will decide who is going to touch it, who will use it, how it will be used, whether it will be used at all. It's our concern, it's our business. No men in the family or the men in the relationships with the women, they are no one to decide how our bodies will be used.
So Raza,
yes,
we discussed that Jilani Bano, we know that she was among the last of her generation of Urdu fiction writers in the subcontinent. Does that make us optimistic or concerned about the future of women writing fiction in Urdu in the 21st century?
Yeah, you just cut me there. I just wanted to, before coming to this question, I would just like to talk briefly about the other novel which is more close to my heart. This novel was called Barish-e-Sang, and it was written in 1985, and this basically this is a novel which is about the Telangana peasants movement.
Yes, absolutely.
And this movement which basically it was a huge moment in subcontinental history, and unfortunately it is not discussed in the course books. So there's a big peasant movement, and basically this novel is about the bonded labor of women, how women basically they are again exploited. I think Zahida Hina, our very great writer, who is actually ill these days, may Allah give her quick health and strong health. She has written a very interesting preface, blurb for this novel, Barish-e-Sang, and she says that it was the publication of this novel which made someone like Jilani Bano go far ahead than many of her contemporaries who were writing, who fell by the wayside, because this novel basically, she was a great writer. Everyone knew when she wrote all those short stories, when she began her literary career in the 1950s, everyone knew she was a great writer. But with the writing of this novel, the second novel, Barish-e-Sang, in 1985, Zahida Hina says that she basically ensured that she is one of the greatest Urdu writers of the 20th century without gender, men और women को मिला के. तो ये हमारी बहुत ही बड़ी राइटर का एक और बहुत बड़ी राइटर को बहुत बड़ा खिलाड़ी तस्वीर है कि इस नॉवल की पब्लिकेशन के बाद वो अजीम मतलब बड़ी राइटर तो वो पहले भी थी जिलानी बानो, लेकिन इस नॉवल के लिखने के बाद वो उनका कद इतना बढ़ जाता है कि वो हमारे अजीम फिक्शन राइटर्स में जिलानी बानो का शुमार होता है. और ये 1985 में उन्होंने कहा था, एंड वी आर राइट नाउ 2026. तो आप खुद अंदाजा लगा लीजिए कि कितनी बड़ी राइटर वो थी. सो कमिंग बैक टू व्हाट यू आस्क्ड, look, Jilani Bano belonged to a very unique generation of writers. अब आप देखें, ये वो writers हैं who were born between 1925 and 1940. They are all great writers. They contain novelists like Quratul Haider, Jamila Hashmi, Masroor Jahan from Lucknow, Altaf Fatima, Nisar Aziz Butt, Khadija Mastoor, Parveen Atif, Khalda Hussain, and Razia Sajjad Zahir. And also short story writers like Hajra Masroor, Umme Amara, Tasneem Manto, and Afra Bukhari. अब इनमें से कई नाम, ज़्यादातर नाम, they are no longer with us. So she, Jilani Bano was one of the last writers of her generation. अब सिर्फ रज़िया फ़सीह साहिबा रह गई हैं जो इत्तेफाक से पाकिस्तानी हैं, जिन्होंने आबला पा नॉवल लिखा जिसको आदमजी प्राइज मिला. वो शिकागो में है और वो भी अपनी 90s में है, अल्लाह उन्हें सलामत रखे. तो ये जनरेशन अनफॉर्चुनेटली अब ज़वाल पज़ीर है, लेकिन इस समय होपलेस होने की जरूरत नहीं है, क्योंकि इनके बाद आने वाली जनरेशन में बहुत कमाल के राइटर्स हैं. हिंदुस्तान में भी है, पाकिस्तान में भी है, और जारी बात है वो सब किसी को फॉलो नहीं करते.
Yes, of course.
जैसे जिलानी बानो ने किसी को फॉलो नहीं किया, उनका असलूब उनका अपना था, اور وہ اٹ واز بیسیکلی born among the material conditions of حیدرآباد دکن. اب دیکھیں وہاں پہ ذکیہ مشہدی ایک بہت ہی کمال کی رائٹر ہے جنہوں نے بالکل جیلانی بانو کے بعد والی جنریشن میں لکھنا شروع کیا, born in 1944, اور جو کام جیلانی بانو نے حیدرآباد دکن کے لیے کیا ہے ذکیہ مشہدی نے وہ کام بہار کے علاقے کے لیے کیا. دیکھیں بہار بھی بہت ہی ایک بہت ہی مطلب پٹنہ بہار آپ کو پتا ہے وہاں شیر شاہ سوری پیدا ہوئے, بہت ہی انڈر پرویش علاقہ ہے کا اس وقت. تو بہار میں ذکیہ مشہدی جیسی رائٹر لکھ رہی ہیں, اور کل ہی میں نے ان کا کمال کا افسانہ پڑھا ہے. آپ کو بتاؤں کہ رمضان کا یہ موقع ہے تو ان کا کمال کا افسانہ ہے یہ میں آپ کو بتاتا ہوں سرمست گلی میں رمضان. اور کیا کمال کی جزیات نگاری انہوں نے کی ہے. مطلب ایک ایسا علاقہ انڈیا کا, مطلب انہوں نے یہ نہیں بتایا کہ دلی ہے یا بہار ہے یا پٹنہ ہے, جو کہ وہ کہتی ہیں کہ وہاں ڈائنامکس ایسے ہیں کہ وہ اقلیتوں کا علاقہ تھا, مطلب مسلمانوں کا, اور اکثریت کا علاقہ بن گیا ہے کیونکہ رمضان میں وہ لوگ وہاں کباب پراٹھے کھانے آتے ہیں. اور کمال کی جزیات نگاری, اور مطلب وہ ایسا انہوں نے اس ہے تو وہ سرمست گلی, لیکن وہ لگتا ہے وہ پاکستان کی بھی کوئی گلی ہو سکتی ہے. اور جو سوشل کمنٹری انہوں نے اس میں کیا جو اس وقت میں انڈیا, مطلب اب تو خیر ہم مودی سرکار کو برداشت کریں, یہ افسانہ 1970s یا 80s میں لکھا گیا تھا. تو اب ان کا ایک بہت ہی کمال کا ناولٹ ہے پارسا بی بی کا بخار, جس کو یہاں لوگ کم جانتے ہیں. تو انڈیا میں موجود ہیں ذکیہ مشہدی, اینڈ ابھی ان کا انتخاب ہمارے دوست نام ندیم ہے, آپ جانتے ہیں کراچی میں بہت کمال کے شاعر اور مترجم ہیں. انہوں نے ابھی پاکستان میں ان کا ایک انتخاب ذکیہ مشہدی کی کہانیوں کا شائع کیا ہے. تو امید ہے کہ پاکستان والے بھی ان کی کہانیوں کو دیکھ کر انہیں پتا چلے گا کہ ان کا کام کتنا ضروری ہے. مطلب جیلانی بانو کی پیڑھی تو ختم ہو گئی, تو اب اچھا پھر پاکستان میں آپ دیکھیں تو ابھی ہمارے یہاں وہ جنریشن موجود ہے. مطلب نیلم احمد بشیر صاحبہ کا ذکر آپ سے پہلے بھی ہو چکا ہے, وہ بھی لکھ رہی ہیں, میں نے بھی ان کے کام پہ لکھا ہے, کمال کی رائٹر ہے. ان کے ہاں بھی بہت ہمیں ملتا ہے. اسی طرح آپ کے شہر میں رہتی ہیں نیلوفر اقبال, آج کل امریکہ میں ہیں, آج کل اپنا ناول لکھ رہی ہیں. میرا خیال ہے ابھی پچھلے سال آپ کو پتا ہے ایک اور بانو تھی کیرالہ کی کنڑا رائٹر ہے بانو مشتاق, ان کو انٹرنیشنل بکر پرائز ملا تھا اور ٹرانسلیشن پہ دیا جاتا ہے. تو میں یہ سوچ رہا تھا کہ بانو مشتاق کی عمر بھی 70-75 سال ہے, اور یہی عمر ہمارے نیلوفر اقبال صاحبہ کی ہے. کہانیاں بھی مطلب وہ 70-50-60 سال سے لکھ رہی ہیں. تو کیا ریزن ہے کہ بانو مشتاق مطلب وہ بھی ایک ایڈوکیٹ ہے, وہاں کی خواتین کے مسائل کے لیے لائر ہیں, وہ بھی وہ مسائل اپنی مٹی سے جڑے ہوئے عورتوں کے مسائل ہیں, ان کو کسی ہمدرد مترجم نے ان کی اٹھا لی, بشتی نے ٹرانسلیٹ کیا اور اس کو دنیا کا سب سے بڑا نوبل کے بعد انعام مل گیا. اور ہمارے یہاں انفارچونیٹلی نیلوفر اقبال جو بہت سینئر رائٹر ہیں, وہ بالکل ان کو ہم لٹری فیسٹیول وغیرہ میں نہیں ان کو بلایا جاتا. حالانکہ میرے خیال میں ان کا جو پہلا افسانوی مجموعہ تھا گھنٹی, آپ نے ضرور اس کا یہ افسانہ گھنٹی جو بہت مشہور ہوا تھا, احمد الدین قاسمی نے فنون میں شاید مشہور ہوا, تو گھنٹی کو بھی 30 سال ہونے والے ہیں. تو کیا بعید ہے کہ کوئی ٹرانسلیٹر ان کے افسانوں کو, کیا وہ بکر پرائز نہیں جیت سکتے؟ وہ اتنی بڑی افسانہ نگار ہیں اور بالکل وہ ان تمام سیلیبریشن سے دور دور رہتی ہیں. مطلب اس ایسا تو یہ تو ان کی جنریشن ہوگی. اچھا پھر ہماری جو میرے اور آپ کے ایج کے لوگ ہیں اس میں, کیونکہ میں خود ٹرانسلیٹر ہوں, میں اکثر پچھلے 3-4 سال سے خواتین پہ ایکسکلوسیولی کام کر رہا ہوں. تو ہماری دوست عثمان آپ جانتے ہیں, آپ کے شہر میں رہتی ہیں, بہت کمال کی افسانہ نگار ہے. اگین ان کا پہلا افسانوی مجموعہ جو ہے وہ آزارگاہ کے نام سے چھپ چکا ہے, اور میں نے تو اس کی کہانی بھی ٹرانسلیٹ کر لی, انگلش میں تو چھپ چکی ہے. اگین شی از سمون ہو ڈیزروز ٹو بی سیلیبریٹڈ, لیکن ان کو انفارچونیٹلی لٹری فیسٹیول سے کوئی لفٹ نہیں ملتی. ابھی ان کا دوسرا افسانوی مجموعہ بھی جو ہے وہ چھپنے کے لیے تیار ہے. اور ان کے پہلے افسانوی مجموعے کے بارے میں غلام حسین ساجد, اماد آپ کے ابو کے وہ کنٹمپرری ہیں, تو ان کی رائے کو ہم ڈسمس نہیں کر سکتے. انہوں نے کہا تھا کہ جب میں آزارگاہ کے افسانے پڑھ رہا تھا فاطمہ عثمان کی, تو مجھے اپنے مرد آنے پہ شرم آنی شروع ہو گئی. اور پھر جب میں نے وہ افسانے پڑھے تو مجھے یہ شرم آئی کہ انہوں نے عورت ہوتے ہوئے کیسے یہ افسانے لکھ لیے. بڑی بے باکی کا کام ہے. اچھا پھر ہماری کراچی میں ایک افسانہ نگار ہے سمینہ نذیر, जो हैदराबाद दक्कन से उनके वालिदैन का ताल्लुक है, और वो उसी मुहावरे को जो जिलानी बानो और वाजिदा रुस्तम ने अपने तरीके से आगे बढ़ा रही हैं। और क्या कमाल की उन्होंने, उनका एक अफसानी मजमुआ कल्लो के नाम से आ चुका है 4-5 साल पहले, और क्या वो कल्लो जो अफसाना है उसमें हमें लिहाज के कुछ हमें पर्दे मिलते हैं, लेकिन वो जबान भी उनकी अपनी है। अभी मैं समीना को मिला था, वो हमारे पैनल में थी, जमीला हाशमी की KNF में, तो उनका नया अफसानी मजमुआ है जाजू भैया। तो ये वो, हालांकि वो भी अफ्रीका में उनका बहुत सा टाइम गुजरा है इमाद समीना नजीर का, और बल्कि उन्होंने पहला नॉवल, उर्दू का पहला नॉवल है स्याही जो मेरे ख्याल में अफ्रीका के बारे में लिखा गया है, वो समीना नजीर ने लिखा है। तो वो अपने अंदाज से हैदराबाद दक्कन के इस्तियारे को बरत रही है पाकिस्तान में होते हुए। तो ये सब चीजें हैं, इनका हमें जिक्र करना चाहिए। तो मैं तो बिल्कुल भी मैं मायूस नहीं हूँ कि जिलानी बानो बिल्कुल अपनी।
Yes, this is great. And Raza, I would request that for our English listeners, you must enlighten them. And since we are in the last few minutes of our program, so it really has been a wonderful discussion. And you mentioned, and you are, as you rightly mentioned, that you are optimistic about the work that is being written in Pakistan fiction especially, and you mentioned a few names also. And so before we wrap up today's program, is there any last thought or reflection you would like to share about the life and work of Jilani Bano in particular and overall? And you were enlightening our listeners about your take on the works. So please go ahead.
Yes, Jilani Bano passed away on the 1st of March 2026, and the 1st of, and March, of course, March 8 is International Women's Day, but March, the whole month of March is regarded as Women History Month. Internationally it is celebrated as Women's History Month because the emphasis is basically on women's writing, not on history, but her story. History, HIS, not his story, but her story. And some of the great women writers in Urdu were born or died in this month. For example, Afra Bukhari Sahiba, Ada Jafri's death happened in March, and Shabnam Shakil, was born and died in March. So it's very interesting that Jilani Bano Sahiba died on the very first day of Women's History Month. So I would like to end with her own quote, which inspires me as well, even though I'm a male. What she said about the role of writing and why she is writing, why she writes. And I quote her on this in Urdu. मेरे मुसलसल लिखते रहने का एक ही मकसद है कि मेरी लिखी हुई एक सतर किसी को सच बोलने की ताकत दे, चोर को मुजरिम कहने का हौसला हो. Let me repeat. मेरे मुसलसल, मतलब she is saying basically in my imperfect translation that the reason I've been writing continuously is there's only one reason. There's only one reason, that even one line which is written by me, it gives someone the power to speak the truth.
This is
and
wonderful.
To give them the encouragement to say that a thief is actually a criminal. This is why I write. And I think it not only goes for Jilani Bano, it goes for all the writers who basically want to challenge the norms, who want to, being a woman, वो कहते हैं ना कि जुर्म एक तो औरत है, दूसरा सच बोलती हैं और तीसरा चैलेंज करती हैं माशरे को. तो ये जुर्म जिलानी बानो में, बर्मला में पाए जाते हैं. तो I think we can take a lot of heart from this line of hers, about the role of writing in our time, in our fractured time.
Yes, this is true. And Raza, any last message for our listeners? And since you have been around for quite some time, and you have such a vast interest, and you translate, you write, you read, and you participate in so many, you moderate also. So what would be your last message for our listeners?
ये 8 मार्च के हवाले से, क्योंकि हम इंटरनेशनल वुमेन्स डे के रिहाने पे खड़े हुए हैं, तो मैं कराची गया था अभी आपको पता है KLF के लिए, तो वहां मैं अतिया दाऊद साहिबा से मिला था। आप जानते हैं किसी तारुफ की मोहताज नहीं, बहुत बेबाक राइटर है सिंधी और उर्दू की। तो उनसे मुझे एक कमाल की राइटर थी जिनके बारे में नहीं अब कोई जानता, सरवत सुल्ताना, जो एक्ट्रेस भी थी और एन अपनी जवानी में शायरा भी थी।
Raza, I would
डिप्रेशन का शिकार हो गई।
जी Raza, I would request you to enlighten our especially for our English listeners. So your last message, you were telling about your recent visit to Karachi. So please go ahead.
So Atiya Daud Sahiba, she's a very daring feminist writer in Urdu and Sindhi. She told me about this very tragic life of Sarwat Sultana, who basically was an actress and she was a poet as well, and she basically disappeared into oblivion. She was facing issues of depression. So when I was leaving, she gave me a lovely gift, a photocopy of her very only collection of poetry. And Sarwat Sultana, basically, she wrote this short poem on Women's Day, which I would like to recite. And this will be my message for your listeners.
Sure.
By Sarwat Sultana. I will try to translate it for tomorrow. कदमों की धमक से फिजा सांस लेने लगी, कदमों की धमक से फिजा सांस लेने लगी, जिद्दोजहद एक सवाल, जिद्दोजहद एक गूंज, आंचल जलते हैं तो क्या, आग के फूलों से बोएंगे फसल खुशबुओं की, लहू का दरिया जागता है, ज़मीं का दिल धड़कने लगा। कदमों की धमक से फिजा सांस लेने लगी, जिद्दोजहद एक सवाल, जिद्दोजहद एक गूंज, आंचल जलते हैं तो क्या, आग के फूलों से बोएंगे फसल खुशबुओं की, लहू का दरिया जागता है, ज़मीं का दिल धड़कने लगा। तो ये this is Sarwat Sultana, the unfortunate poetess.
Sarwat Sultana Sahiba's wonderful. Yes, and this is wonderful message. And dear listeners, we come to the end of this show, and as I mentioned earlier that it was a special episode, special broadcast with respect to the World Women's Day, which will be celebrated tomorrow. So it was on International Women's Day, and our special guest, I'm genuinely grateful to you, Raza, for joining us in this exploration of the life and works of Jilani Bano Sahiba, a writer whose stories capture the complexities of society, and we discuss the changing culture of Hyderabad of that time and the lives and struggle of women in particular. And her works will continue to resonate with the readers across the world, and we hope that today's conversation has inspired our listeners also. Raza Naeem, once again, thank you very much for joining us and taking time out for this special episode. And dear listeners, this is me, Imad Kasir, on Planet FM 87.6, signing off. So till next time, Allah Hafiz.